Good evening. It is now 5:30. We are going to call the meeting to order on this evening. Welcome to the Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Advisory Board. It is an honor to be here tonight to serve, and we thank all of our residents for joining us to to hear the conversation tonight amongst the board as they discuss the Non-Discrimination Ordinance. We will start off the meeting with a roll call. We'll start with our board members that are online first and then go to Kelly.
My name is T. Fan. I was nominated by the mayor.
My name is Jennifer Brehan. I was nominated by the mayor as well.
My name is Kelly Grant. I was appointed by Brandon Johnson.
Shala Perez. I was appointed by Becky Tuttle.
Tabitha Lehman, appointed by Councilman Blubaugh.
Mackenzie Borland. I was appointed by Mayor Brandon Whipple.
Pamela Hughes Mason. I was appointed by Mayor Brandon Whipple.
Thank you all. I will now stand for a motion for the approval of the agenda for September 21st.
So moved for approval of the agenda for September 21st, 2021.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Thank you. We'll now stand for a motion for the minutes from August 24th, 2021.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes unless anybody has any edits. Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Great. So as we discussed on last week, tonight's agenda is about the Non-Discrimination Ordinance. The board will take this conversation up tonight and have a robust discussion amongst the board members. As we shared on last week, this meeting will not have a public comment section. The intent was to host the public forum on last Tuesday to ensure that the advisory board had all of the public input as they began their discussion. In addition to last week's conversation, the board also voted that Tabitha Lehman will facilitate the conversation amongst the board members. In the room tonight, we do have Dante Martin, the Assistant City Manager, who will also be available for questions. We have representatives from the Kansas Leadership Center who would be available for questions, and the City Attorney is en route. Jennifer Magana will also be here for questions and any points of clarification that need to be made. Ronnelle Carrion is not in, will not be able to attend the meeting on tonight, but did submit her vote, and that has been provided to one of the board members to include in your discussion on this evening. Are there any questions before you get started with the facilitated conversation?
I was just going to point out that Mr. Polite just arrived online.
Good evening, Mr. Polite.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Pastor.
Good evening.
Pastor Gates. Any questions for the board before we turn the meeting over to Tabitha? Seeing none, Tabitha, the floor is yours.
All right, I wanted to start by just kind of asking the board if, first of all, everyone received the KLC report and had an opportunity to read it.
Yes, I've received it and read. Received.
Additionally, the outstanding questions, I'm sorry, the outstanding questions that were not addressed in the KLC report that were then sent to the City of Wichita, did everyone get a chance to look over Ms. Magana's answers on those as well?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just making sure that I've covered everything I wanted to ask everyone. All right, so just for the sake of on record and those in the audience, I did want to go ahead and quickly, very quickly, read through these questions that were unanswered from the KLC report and the city attorney's response to those so that they have the answers here before we begin moving forward. We did also, all of us had an opportunity to submit questions that we had and thoughts that we thought might need to be clarified. We have written that out, and then Shala actually very clearly spent an excruciating amount of time putting a draft potential report together for us to look over, and I hope everyone's had a chance to see that as well. So the first unanswered question was, what protections are there in the NDO to ensure Christian business owners who have sincerely held religious beliefs that are inconsistent with the NDO will have their religious beliefs respected? And the answer was, examples are needed of what sincerely held Christian beliefs are that are inconsistent with the NDO, and to which provisions of the NDO, employment, housing, or public accommodations that this questioner believes would conflict with the NDO. However, this ordinance has several exceptions related to religion in employment, in public accommodations, and the statement that the ordinance shall not be construed or applied in the manner that violates any law, including the Kansas Preservation of Religious Freedom Act. Each situation would depend on all facts that likely exceed what are posited here in hypothetical questions. Any complaint would be reviewed completely on the case-by-case basis. The next question was, will the proposed NDO have the same impact on private businesses owners as the Jack the Cake Baker or Ronnelle the Florist case? And I may not have said that name right, and I apologize. The answer was, while this calls for engaging in hypothetical analysis, it should be noted that the Cake Baker case, in quotes, Masterpiece Cake Shop, was not decided on the merits of Colorado's NDO, and the U.S. Supreme Court recently declined to hear the Washington State Florist case. So there is not clear guidance in this area. What is also relevant is, unlike states like Colorado and Washington, Kansas has the Preservation of Religious Freedom Act, which would likely be asserted and applied in a case in which a business owner wished to challenge the constitutionality of the proposed NDO. Each situation would depend on all facts that likely exceed what is posited in the hypothetical questions. Any complaint would be reviewed completely on a case-by-case basis. Question 3 was, any individual cases of all alleged discrimination are they going to be publicly available? Are the names of the alleged violators going to be published? The answer was, Cora excludes from mandatory disclosure, quote, records of agencies involved in administrative adjudication and civil litigation compiled in the process of detecting or investigating violations of civil law or administrative rules and regulations, if disclosure would interfere with the prospective administrative adjudication or civil litigation or reveal the identity of a confidential source or undercover agent, end quote. The city may consider a policy governing records of adjudicated cases. Question 3 was, what constitutes reasonable educational requirements, which is an alternative to a monetary penalty? And the answer is, there is no definition in the ordinance. Courts apply common meaning to terms where there are no definitions. The municipal court judge, as the hearing officer, has discretion in imposing this alternative penalty. 5, regarding public accommodations. A local Catholic church is hosting a bazaar. A person attempts to enter a restroom of their chosen gender or their biological sex, but they are turned away. Would that interaction constitute a violation of the NDO? Answer, the NDO's definition of place of accommodation excludes a religious organization which, quote, restricts its products, facilities, or services to the members of such organization, their guests, or individuals who promote the principles for which the organization, association, a corporation, or organization is established or maintained, end quote. If an event such as a bazaar is open to the public, this exemption may or may not apply during such events. Section 5 says, quote, nothing in this chapter shall be interpreted to apply to a religious organization's performance of religious function, including, but not limited to, the 1, provision of goods, service, facilities, privileges, advantages, or accommodations related to these I'm not going to, anybody want to say that word for me? Because it's not coming out tonight. Solemnization or celebration of a marriage, I apologize. Or 2, performance of its religious teachings, ministry, religious duties, or practices, advancement of religion, or other religious activities, end quote. It is conceivable that the church could assert that the bazaar is operated for the purpose of, quote, advancement of religion, end quote, by, for example, raising church funds. In addition, Section 6 says that, quote, nothing in this chapter shall be construed or applied in a manner that violates any law or unlawfully infringes upon the rights under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Section 7 of the Kansas Constitution Bill of Rights, the Adoption Protection Act, KSA 60-5322 and amendments thereto, and the Kansas Preservation of Freedom Act, KSA 60-5301 and amendments thereto. Each situation would depend on all facts and likely exceed what is posited in the hypothetical questions. Any complaint would be reviewed completely and on a case-by-case basis. Number 6 is the Lord's Diner has a men's restroom and a women's restroom. If someone who is a biological male enters a women's restroom or vice versa, they are stopped. Does this constitute a violation of the NDO if it passes in its current form? And basically the answer is the same as the previous, that this would potentially fall under the legal authority that was already discussed. Question 7 is a family of a same-sex couple comes into the St. Anthony Family Shelter with their children, and they need a place to stay for the night. The rules of St. Anthony Family Shelter are that people of the same sex do not sleep together. They are told, sure, you can stay, but we ask that you stay in separate quarters. Is that a violation of the NDO as it's currently written? The answer is the NDO's definition of, quote, a place of public accommodation, end quote, applies to establishments that are open to the general public. It is likely that the shelter has some type of screening or admission criteria and is therefore not open to the general public. Also of note is the definition of place of public accommodation, which excludes religious organizations, and then it gives a lot of the same information that was already given in previous answers. Number 8 is what do the terms actual and perceived mean in reference to the proposed ordinance? Does similar language exist on the state or federal level? Answer. The language mirrors the language of the Overland Park Ordinance, and there have been no cases litigated resulting from its NDO. Courts apply common meanings to terms where no definition is provided. These terms are not included in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, nor in the Kansas Acts Against Discrimination. The U.S. Supreme Court has held, however, that Title VII's protections based on sex are broader than gender alone. Question 9, why is there no protection for citizenship under the NDO's public accommodations or housing sections? Answer, this is not included in the Overland Park language, but could be considered by the City Council. Question 10, and we're almost to the end, I promise. Question 10, do fees for each occurrence mean someone can accuse someone for several occurrences in the same lawsuit? Answer, a complaint would likely treat multiple instances as one complaint with one penalty. Question 11, where does the fine money go? The answer is the city's general fund, and it would defray the cost of enforcement. 12, does the ordinance allow for preferential treatment of veterans? Answer, there is no duty to apply the veterans' preference created by this ordinance. 13, is retaliation considered prohibited conduct under the NDO? Answer, yes. 14, what protections are in place to protect an abuse of the NDO process by complainants who have an ulterior motive to bring claims beyond seeking relief from discrimination? And the answer is any complainant filing and swearing to the veracity of a complaint. Any complainant is filing and swearing to the veracity of the complaint. State law prohibits, quote, unquote, quote, making false information, end quote, which is a felony. All right, I just wanted to read those in just so that everyone in the room has the same information we are working off of as far as the information we received from the attorney. I think that was very helpful and did clear up quite a few things for me, so I am hopeful that did as well for everyone else. There were several things brought up that people felt might need to be discussed. I figured at this point we can open it up to either discussion or if anybody wants to make a motion or however anybody on the board wants to proceed at this point. I would just be open for input from anybody.
I'd like to ask that we consider looking at how we feel as a board as it relates to the NDO going forward, or what we actually want to do before we actually look at all the inner workings of it as language in different areas, but that we get a feel or reach an agreement on that first before we look at all the other inner workings of the NDO.
So are you recommending that we basically take a non-binding vote for or against, or are you recommend, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you are proposing.
I would say yes.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? So are you making a motion?
I so move.
Okay.
And this is Shala Perez for those who are online, and I will second that.
Okay, so if I am understanding the motion, and please correct me if I am wrong, we are making a motion that we take a non-binding vote to see where everyone stands and to determine if further discussion is necessary or if we are just ready to take action. Is that what you were proposing?
Yes.
Okay. So, again, just to make sure I've wrapped my mind around it, if we vote yes, you are saying we're just saying we're ready to take a non-binding vote, right? Okay, sorry. I'm making this too complicated. Okay. Now let's take the vote. Everyone in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And those opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, so at this point, I think the best thing to do then is to just, if everyone's okay with it, I will just go through the members who are present and basically take a yay. Yes.
Excuse me. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm listening. I'm sorry.
Okay. At this point, if it's okay, and if no one has any discussion before we do so, I think it would be, the next step would then to just go through and maybe start online and then work our way through like we did for attendance, and just take an up or down vote on whether or not people intend to vote for or against the NDO.
And before beginning, I would like to say that we have a quorum because there are 11 of us and there are 9.
Yes, I noticed. All right, so we will start online then. So, T, do you want to go first?
I'm for it.
I'm for it.
Mr. Polite?
For it.
I would vote to approve.
I vote to approve.
I also vote to approve.
I vote to approve.
I vote to approve.
I'm against it.
Okay. So at this point, I think we just then need to decide, do we need to go through and discuss? I mean, does anybody want to make statements why they're for or against, or do we want to, I mean, how do we want to move forward as Mr. Gates? Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you were kind of asking what direction to go. I
Yes.
was going to suggest that we maybe look at the document that was sent in, because you mentioned how much work had been put
Yes.
into it. It covers the questions that were sent in by each person. Tabitha sent some, not questions, but points in. I sent some points in, and Ronnelle sent some points in, and I was reading the document that was provided, and it does cover the majority of all of those points.
Okay.
So that would be my suggestion, that we look at that document next after.
Okay. Mr. Gates, I wanted to give you a chance. It looked like you had something you wanted to say. No. Okay.
Since I did draft this
Yes.
with the intent that other people could, dissent or put their opinion in or add to and subtract.
I think one of the things that came up several times in our discussions, and I just would like to just address this, is the concept of whether or not this ordinance was going to infringe on people's religious freedoms. And I was satisfied with the answers we received, from the city attorney, and the fact that there are already laws in place that already impose basically the same restrictions, and so that was not a concern to me as far as that there are exceptions made for religious organizations. That was obviously something that was important to a lot of people. I think there was one, or actually several of us brought up the timeline for filing the complaint, whether it was appropriate at 60 days or if we felt that it needed to be extended out for a longer period of time. I didn't know if anyone wanted to discuss that or not. I think on your report, Shala, there was that this might be something we wanted to discuss, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Yes.
if we kind of work in order.
Do you want to just start?
Then,
How about I just let you start and go through? Does that sound good? Or do you want me
or
to do it?
you can.
Okay,
since
all right.
you're
No,
leading,
it's
but-
fine. I just didn't want to step on toes. Okay, so in this report, for those in the room who do not have it in front of you, there is a section that is an introduction and committee charge, which is where we talk about the city and the mayor asking the Diversity and Inclusion and Civil Rights Board, Advisory Board, to study the city's proposed ordinance and to make recommendations. So that is what we have been seeking to do. We wanted to talk about our process. So if anybody at any point when I'm reading it wants to say something, please go ahead. Do you want me to read it word for word? Okay, I will start.
I think since
okay.
At this point, my understanding is we're developing a report now. So
Okay.
we're in the process of that. So
I will read it word
we
for
can,
word.
yeah, let the public know that that's what's in the document, and each of us can agree or disagree or improve upon it, I'm sure.
Okay, so we will start with the introduction or committee charge. I will read that, and then if anybody has any additions, corrections, or changes that they'd like to make, certainly make your voice heard. So on July 22nd, 2021, the mayor and the city council charged the City of Wichita Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Advisory Board with studying the city's proposed ordinance creating Section 2.06 of the City of Wichita Code relating to non-discrimination, or NDO, for the purpose of making recommendations, including but not limited to the adoption or rejection of the NDO and recommended revisions. So that is what Shala has as the introduction. Does anyone have any issues with that or would like to make any changes? Okay.
I would also ask if anybody from the legal department or anybody with knowledge of this process, how it's typically done, if we're off track, or if you guys have any additions or things that could be improved. We are open to suggestions.
I would just add that before you get into the language and trying to wordsmith tonight, since there is a lot of conversation that needs to happen regarding what's in the meat of the ordinance, it may behoove us to get to where there is concern about the language in the ordinance, and I think we can get to fine-tuning kind of the facts of, we did this work, these are the folks that we engaged. It might be helpful if we, for those that are in the audience, and to have a robust conversation about whether or not to move forward with some of the recommendations that you may have on some of the items. If we start there and then work backwards at the end of the hour, we may be able to make some progress, because I think we'll get caught up if we get into wordsmithing with 9 people.
Okay, so if it's all right, I'd like to go ahead and read the committee process, and then after that, it does go into some of the questions and Shala's analysis of it. And I get what you're saying about the wordsmithing. That to me, the wordsmithing isn't quite as important. So I get what you're saying. So I will read through the process. If anyone, I do want to make sure people have the opportunity to add anything that they would like to this section specifically. So the committee process was this advisory board as a whole or through individual members considered the following in its analysis of the ordinance and the recommendation process: history of the development of the NDO, previous and current drafts of the NDO, relevant state and federal laws that prohibit discrimination, similar ordinances adopted in Kansas and other similarly situated communities, public input in the form of public comments, facilitated workshops, and written correspondence from key stakeholders, elected and appointed officials, community members, subject matter experts, and members of the protected classes. Research, we also considered research and relevant news articles, and a review of the current process, policies, and procedures of agencies charged with investigating discrimination complaints in Kansas. The City of Wichita Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Advisory Board met multiple times to gather information and develop recommendations. These meetings included a presentation from Assistant City Manager Dante Martin on the history and City Council actions related to the NDO, a presentation by the Law Department of the City of Wichita covering legal aspects of the NDO, a 2-day workshop facilitated by Kansas Leadership Center to hear from key stakeholder feedback, I apologize. Multiple public comment sessions during DIC-RAB meetings, and review of public comments during City Council meetings. Engagement from individual members also included attendance at multiple District Advisory Board meetings. Several of us also attended the listening tour events held by the W, a community of young professionals. Attendance at City Council members' coffees and breakfasts and online Facebook chats with Mayor Whipple. Attendance at various community events and individual meetings with organization representatives, community and business leaders, and members of the public. I think it's important that everybody understand that we did not just have 2 meetings and make this decision. There are some of us that spent many, many hours meeting with people, both for and against this, and did quite a bit of legal research, not being attorneys, but did our best to understand this entire situation and its impact on the entire community. So with that said, I think if we go with what LaShonda's recommendation is, then if we want to address any of the meat of it before we kind of go through wordsmithing. So the next thing was analysis and recommendations. So this is the wording that is currently in the report that Charlotte put together on September 21st, 2021. After thoughtful consideration of all input and information presented, the DIC-RAB board met to discuss the NDO benefits and concerns. Through a consensus process after completing the research and analysis, an analysis required for recommendations, we determined that, and then Shala has here what basically her determinations were. It says protected classes under the NDO were overwhelmingly in support of the adoption of the NDO. The passage of this NDO is consistent with other municipalities in Kansas adopting similar non-discrimination ordinances to demonstrate their commitment to ensuring equal opportunity in employment, housing, and public accommodation. The vast majority of issues raised came from non-protected classes, which either wholly or partially denied the existence of discrimination and or centered around the following concerns.
Can we stop there?
Yes, ma'am.
To just discuss this to make sure that we agree as
Absolutely.
far as the last statement. I mean,
yes.
I think as we get to the next point, but how do we feel about that? What was just stated?
Or maybe what we should do is we've got the issues that were come up, and maybe instead of trying to dissect Shala's statement here, should we?
And I'm not talking about her statement.
That was just my statement.
Okay. I'm not just talking about her statement. I'm just saying, as a board, are we in agreement to the fact that that is what occurred, or are there other things we want to add to that? So
I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I did not understand that. Yes. I will pause and open that up if anyone wants to add anything to the process. I would honestly add, now that given the chance to slow down and think for a second, when we say that we reviewed relevant state and federal laws that prohibit discrimination, I also reviewed federal state laws that are regarding religious freedoms as well. And I think that's important that that be documented in this document. Anything else?
Just wanted to open it up because as we're going through this, we're thankful for the work that has been done, but just wanted to make sure that we're all clear. And if there is any other input or addition to that, or other things we should possibly consider, I think now is the time we should hear those things. So everybody, please chime in.
Okay, so the first section was religious exemptions and exceptions concerns. And I think let me see. see. I will go ahead and read this, and then I think it would be appropriate for us to stop and discuss it, this one section, and then we'll do that with each section thereafter. The board heard testimony from members of the faith-based community who were both in support of and opposed to the NDO. The involvement of the faith-based community in the public and stakeholder comment opportunities outweighed input from other protected classes and or interested parties. The issues raised involved ensuring federal and state religious exemptions and exceptions would not be jeopardized by the NDO. Actually, I think before we get to the analysis, just wanted to see if anybody has any discussion on that statement to start with. Okay, seeing none, I will go on to the analysis. Because the Non-Discrimination Ordinance would generally mirror state and federal law, including protections from the Kansas Preservation of Religious Freedom Act, the Kansas Constitution's Bill of Rights Section 7 protection, and through specific exemptions for religion and religious organizations.
After reading the questions again that we received last night from Jennifer Magana, I hope I said that correct, that she did mention in there that the First Amendment under the U.S. Constitution was also a source of protections, and that's something that I didn't include specifically, if we want to do that.
Okay. I think that would be valuable to include as well. Any discussion on that? Okay, any more discussion on this section before we move on? Well, I should say the recommendation that Shala writes here is to upholding the NDO regarding religious exemption and exceptions as written. So is there any discussion on that? Okay, then I think we're ready to move on to the next section. Vagueness of the ordinance and investigative process. The board heard comments from the public that the use of the words perceived or actual in the language of the ordinance were not precise, and that the investigative process was not fully detailed in the ordinance. So the analysis is...
Stop before we go there.
Yes, I'm sorry. I should have paused again.
So do we have clarity on why the language was used, perceived or actual? Do we know as a board why those two things were used and why it wasn't just actual?
Anybody want to weigh in on that?
I did put something in the analysis part, and I believe that that was also addressed in the questions for the city of Wichita, and there was kind of a little bit of, I wouldn't say additional information, but her response was a little bit different than my response in looking at that.
And I'm just kind of asking because we have other persons viewing and listening. We have the documents in front of us.
Right.
And so just kind of wanted to make sure that we all had the same information as it relates to the language, because that was a part of one of the sticking points was the word perceived or actual.
And I can, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say on question 8, it does address this, and it says that typically the U.S. Supreme Court has held, however, that the protections based on sex are broader than gender alone. So I think it expands, that language expands beyond, you know, the hard and fast actual. So that's the way I interpreted number 8 to read that it allowed greater expansion beyond just sex and gender.
And I believe there is a court case, if I remember correctly, and Ms. Magana, if you could help me out if I'm wrong, was it Bostock? That was specifically what the Supreme Court, where they expanded, I'm flailing here a little bit, expanded out the definitions more, so to speak. Is that a fair interpretation? Okay, thank you. I think it would also, in this, under this section, I do think it would be valuable to incorporate Ms. Magana's comments as well into the report, if everyone is comfortable with that.
Just to double check, the way that I stated the issue, is everybody, before we get into the analysis, because I think we're half in the analysis and half in describing the issue, is everybody okay with the description of the issue? I did combine the issue of vagueness and the words perceived or actual, which were two different issues, but kind of on the same track. So everybody's okay with that being the description of the issue, or?
Yes.
So then I think we could move to the.
Yeah. I was just making sure I had my papers in order, so I was
We
reading the correct
replacing it
thing.
with.
I've been switching between too many papers.
Huh?
I'm sorry?
Are we changing the word perceived? Is that my understanding?
No. Right now, we're just discussing at this point, so I was getting ready to read the recommendation that Shala had put forward, and then we can discuss that recommendation. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So on the issue of vagueness of the ordinance and investigative process, the recommendation was to upholding the NDO language, NDO regarding the use of language perceived and actual as written. So at this point,
I think we skipped the analysis section.
oh, we did.
Yeah,
I
sorry.
apologize. I was making notes everywhere.
I'm so sorry. Before the analysis, I just wanted to make sure online that we make sure if there's someone, because it sounded like maybe Brianna was getting ready to say something. I just wanted to make sure we go back to her to see if, prior to us reading it, if there was something. I know you asked the question about perceived and actual, but just wanted to make sure if you had any input or feedback or questions.
Does anyone online have anything they wanted to bring up before we discuss the recommended action or go through the analysis? Okay, doesn't look like it. So the analysis as written by Shala is the DICRAB, heard testimony from the City of Wichita Law Department and from subject matter experts with Folston Siefkin Law Firm, who stated the process would be further developed and defined in accordance with the ordinance and any working agreements implemented between the U.S. Equal Protections Opportunity Commission and the Kansas Human Rights Commission. During both occasions, the use of the word perceived and actual as used in the ordinance was also explained. The use of these words is consistent with establishing the law's applicability regarding state of mind and is consistent with the principles of legal interpretation and usage. This to me almost sounds like we're making a legal statement. I don't know. I'm just not an attorney, so. Does anybody want to discuss the analysis that Shala put together? Do you have any concerns that we're making statements that are awry? Yes, sorry, Ms. Magana. I apologize.
Good evening, Jennifer Magana. You are in an area that is a little bit gray. The question was, why are these, I'll go back to the question, why was the term there? Surely because that's the language that was adopted from the Overland Park Ordinance.
Okay.
It is not found in state law or codified in federal law. It is a policy decision on how to word that definition.
Okay.
I don't know that your analysis is making a legal conclusion.
Okay.
It's probably, it's going to be a recommendation that can be evaluated. So
okay.
I think you can proceed.
Okay,
however you wish to proceed.
Yeah.
So if I'm clear, it could be a recommendation as it relates to what we agree on, as it relates to perceived or actual. That could be a recommendation that could go back.
Yes, so this board could either just agree and say we are okay with leaving perceived or actual, or we could make the recommendation that be looked at more in depth by the city council or changed, or
that's absolutely correct. I mean, there could be another way to phrase that definition, that could be looked at.
Okay. Thank you.
So are we kind of tracking as we're going along to the places where we possibly want to have recommendations back or consideration for different things to occur as it relates to timelines, language?
Yes.
All those things.
Yes.
So this would be definitely one of those areas.
Be one that I think we need to come back and discuss more robustly. Or we could just simply pause here and have that discussion now before we move on, which would probably be the better way to handle that, in my opinion. I would say let's just discuss it now instead of coming back. How does everyone feel about that? Okay.
That sounds good.
All right. So
I could say that we could add her interpretation, which is courts apply common meanings to terms where no definition is provided. And that's on number 8, where it talks about actual or perceived. And then we could amend the recommendation to say that if it was necessary, that there could be changes if they would like to do so to those words.
Another point of consideration would be just to the recommendation to remove that word, perceived, and just go with actual.
No, I don't think we should remove perceived, just because perception by the individual or by others can vary, and there are issues with perception of gender in the trans community, and I think we have to leave it in there as perceived by oneself of their gender.
I appreciate and understand what you're saying. I guess my question comes from the fact that we find that in the ordinance as it relates to Overland Park, but when we talk at the federal or state level, that word use is just not used, if I'm correct. So that was my only concern.
I think we can do better than the state or federal level and our local level and make sure that we add that protection.
So would you say that would come with also an explanation, meaning?
Well, there is an explanation in the NDO on page 6 that it is actual or perceived by the individual or another emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people, such as heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, or asexual. So I feel like there is somewhat of an explanation within the NDO, and then we get clarification on number 8 from legal, and we have Bostic saying that we use language to expand beyond simply gender or sex.
I would agree. It does speak again to, and this is not a legal terminology, but the state of mind, and so it does have something to do with what's actually going on in the ordinance. So while I think maybe somebody in the legal department could substitute that word for something different, there does need to be a word in there that speaks to the relevance of that perception. Again, I don't know what other word would be used there to do that, but we could make a recommendation that if there was a more appropriate word, that could be looked at by the City of Wichita Law Department and used instead of either of those words.
I think as we sit here, we should look at both sides. So that's why I kind of asked the question, knowing that that was part of some of the fueling for some of the questions we got.
And that would leave an opportunity for them to know that we're okay if they want to change that. That would be something that we would be okay with.
So I guess at this point, what I need to know is someone making a motion to, I guess at this point we aren't taking an official vote line by line, but is it the will of the board that we, in our recommendation on the language perceived or actual, that further research be done, or, you know, I just need to know what the will of the board is on that one.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I think I think when we take this word out, we are targeting a specific group. My understanding of actual or perceived has developed as I've learned more through this process, and this is a specific protection for trans community specifically. So I think we have to be careful about just recommending to yank it out, because perception, you know, some people individuals in the trans community don't present the gender that they identify with or perceive themselves to be. So you may perceive them to be one way, they perceive themselves a different way. So that perception is a key word in protecting people based on what their gender identity is.
And for me, the question is perception the right word to use? The board needs to decide, because I just looked up perception and other words to be used with the same understanding. And perception actually looks like, perceived actually looks the best. Because all that other junk, I think in using this term, because people are they perceive themselves one way and other people perceive them to be another way, this is probably going to be the best word. I personally don't think it needs to be removed. So maybe we need to figure out, since there is no better word, I just looked it up, that words that mean the same, and that one there appears to be the best. So what does the board as a group think of that word?
I think that this word, I think that this word, I agree with you, Jen, is imperative to the essence of what we're doing, the essence of the law, in protecting one of the most, or maybe the most vulnerable group in our community, in the LGBTQ community.
This is Shala, I would agree with that.
All right, so how about I just throw a motion out there that we vote on whether or not to, let me get my mind around how I think we should word this. I think we should take a vote on if it is the will of the board to recommend the language be left alone and the word perceived stay in the NDO.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All right, so we'll start online, and T, if you want to vote first.
I would recommend it to be left alone.
Jennifer?
I would recommend that we just keep the word perceived, because this says my suggestion is to replace perceived with current. Now, I think we need to keep perceived.
So are you voting in favor or are you asking for an amendment? I'm sorry, I was having trouble understanding you.
I'm asking that we keep perceived. So
Okay.
I guess it's to be read like it is.
Mr. Polite?
I'm sorry, I was muted. I'm okay with leaving it as is.
Yes.
Okay. Kelly?
I vote to leave it as is.
I vote to leave it as is.
I'm still trying to figure out, this is gonna sound weird, the actual issue and figuring out the definition. So until I kind of understand it a little better, I'm gonna abstain from voting. And
okay, we can, what is it that you need to understand? I'm sorry.
So
do we need to?
Yeah.
How about we finish taking the vote, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
And if you would like to discuss it further, we can do that.
Sounds good.
And just in future, if we have things like that, ask before we start the vote. How does that sound? Okay, we'll continue on.
To use perceive and actual.
I'm
supportive.
Yes. Supportive, okay. Mr. Gates?
I'm against the NDO, so.
That's fine.
So my question is, because this is something that I was asking at the forum, so the word actual or perceived, can someone just give me a very simple definition of how, because this is the thing, is we're trying to define it, and I'm someone that really needs something dumbed down. Very simple for me, so that would be great.
I don't think your mic is on, Kelly. Is your mic on? Okay.
Is it on now?
Now it's on,
Now
yes.
it's on, all right. So a couple of examples, because that's how I learn best, is to know, like an example of something. So if you were fired because you were perceived for being gay, even when you were actually straight, that would be someone else's perception of you and a discrimination based on a perception. Okay, and so another one would be, straight men being perceived as gay, or people of color being perceived as non-citizens would be another example. So discrimination based on that perception. Discrimination like you act like a woman, but you look like a man type of discrimination perception. How someone is perceiving these different categories and then discriminating based on that perception.
So one of the misconceptions, I think, at the Kansas Leadership Center, this has nothing to do with the actual perception of reporting, because that was one of the questions at the KCL.
I'm not sure I understand what you
So
mean.
one of the questions at KCL was people were, some of the stakeholders were asking if you were reporting, let's say something happened. Never mind, I think that cleared it up enough, but anyway, I just want to make sure I fully understood it before I put my vote in, and that's why I didn't want to vote.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And again, please just make sure if we have another issue like that, speak up and we'll discuss it fully before we get to a vote.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that was something that was brought up as a concern that did concern me, and I did some research on it, was what if someone, they were not a transgender person, but they decided that they were going to utilize this NDO to have an excuse to enter the opposite sex's restroom and do something that they should not have done. And for me, what that kind of kept coming back to is the fact that it's already illegal for someone to assault another person. It's all those things are already illegal. There is no one standing guard and keeping track of who's going into which restroom now. I mean, when my kids were little, I would literally block the entrance to the men's restroom when my boys were little so that no one was in there but them and let them use the restroom. I mean, there are things that can be done anyway. And so I think that was something that was brought up multiple times, but there are already laws that make it illegal to assault someone. And so to me, that's not as much into this conversation as maybe some people would like me to. It's not as weighted as maybe some people would like me to. Okay, so is everyone satisfied with our discussion surrounding the words actual and perceived and ready to move on? And I think at this point we should probably discuss the process as a separate thing because we did have a discussion about
am I clear, motion carried?
Yes, the motion carried. Yes, there was one no and one abstain.
Tabitha, this is polite.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Just based on your definition that you just, scenario that you just described on perception and the law that currently exists against someone going in the restroom, it carries me back just a little bit on my thoughts.
Okay.
So are we saying, and forgive me, team and board, but are we saying that if I perceive myself, however I perceive myself, regardless of the law, I can now go into the opposite sex restroom?
If I can just say that we will get into the bathroom concerns here in a few minutes.
I probably
because I think that's a separate conversation.
But I think Mr. Polite is concerned
you
about
talking about restrooms, and that's why. Okay,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yes, we will discuss that, but I think I'm also concerned that your question does actually pertain to the actual or perceived as well. Can you ask the question again, just because I want to make sure I'm understanding it fully?
Well, you start talking specifically about restroom usage with the word perception, and it just took me back a little bit in my thoughts on this conversation. And so you were saying, are we saying with this NDO that now voting using the language of perceived and actual, that now anyone would be able to use any restroom?
I'm not sure the perceived or actual, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure the perceived or actual is where that is going to come into, but if we get down to the restroom conversation and you would like to circle back to the perceived and actual, we absolutely can. How does that sound? Let's get down to that discussion, and then we can circle back if we need to. Does that sound fair?
Okay, that's fair.
All right. So I've made it. Yes.
I'd also like to add to however you go down, I'd like to also add that there'd be a conversation about how the NDO might impact schools. Because I know that Mr. Polite is on a part of the USC 259 and how that might then impact the way things are done on the school board.
All right, I'm making that note. Okay, so the next item that is in this report is discussing dual discrimination laws. So I'll read the description and then open that up for any comments or conversation, and then we'll continue on through the actual dual discrimination laws section. So the board heard comments from the public that expressed concern that there were already federal and state protections prohibiting discrimination. Does anybody, I mean, that statement's pretty factual, but just wanted to see if anybody had any comment on that. All right. I think we may have lost Mr. Polite. Hopefully he's able to get back on. So the analysis that Shala has here says federal, state, and local laws provide avenues for enforcement and relief. These laws are not identical in procedural requirements, filing deadlines, protections, or remedies, although some may overlap. This approach is not unique to civil discrimination laws. It is similarly used in criminal law. For example, the flexibility to charge drug crimes at the federal, state, or city level is utilized depending upon the complexity and severity of the case, available resources, and other factors. As mentioned previously, there will be an agreement between agencies as to how these cases are adjudicated. So again, before I move on from the analysis, is there any discussion on the dual discrimination laws before we discuss the recommendation?
In reading it, I think it's clear.
All right. Okay. So then the recommendation in this report is to uphold the NDO as written and an agreement between agencies as to how these cases are adjudicated, implemented. So does anyone have, again, a discussion on that? Okay, do we have a motion to make that recommendation? Okay, I guess maybe we only make the motion and vote on it if there's discussion around it. Okay, that's fine.
Because it's by common consent that we're agreeing, so.
Sounds good. So the next item was frivolous lawsuits. The board heard comments from the public that expressed concern over frivolous lawsuits resulting from the passage or interpretation of the NDO. Again, that's a factual statement. We did hear those comments quite a bit, so just anyone have any comments on that before we move on? Okay. There we have Mr. Polite again. So the analysis was protections and remedies exist if a civil lawsuit was brought for wrongful purposes. That is the analysis, and I think that was also something that Ms. Magana touched on too. I'm trying to reference that.
So are we saying that it really doesn't need to be mentioned or spoken to in the NDO specifically?
I think that was what Shala was saying.
Well, and also, the way I understood it is that we have the mechanisms in place to handle that through the legal avenues. Like, it doesn't need to necessarily be, it's not written into every single law that if you do this incorrectly or if you file a frivolous lawsuit, here's what happens.
Right.
They just automatically triggers, or there's a process of filing. And is that correct, Jennifer? If somebody files a frivolous lawsuit,
and as she's coming, I'd like to say this. We know that there are triggers as it relates to in those areas, But sometimes when we talk about NDOs or talk about, sometimes specific language is very important. And it may not be what we need to do. It may be the recommendation on down the line. But I'm just saying we're covered and it not being there, because that was some of the feedback that I was getting as it relates to that area.
Okay, I'm going to try to address the question. Should there be language, or is it typical to have language or not have language about frivolous filings? If you file a lawsuit in federal court and it's clearly frivolous, there can be sanctions against the plaintiff, including monetary adverse jury instruction. There is a penalty for filing federal lawsuits that are frivolous. Many, and if not most, of our ordinances don't have that statement. What is a fact is there's a state law that makes it a crime to file what's called false information. If you're found guilty of false information at the state level, I mean, that's a crime. But this doesn't address that. It simply doesn't have anything. I don't know if I'm answering your question. Maybe you better feel free to rephrase it. But it's probably fair to say it's not typical to include language addressing the penalty for filing a false complaint. And I just don't know that it's in every type of ordinance, like, you know, that is like this. I'd have to look at, like, the state law, what it would have. It just isn't coming to mind right now.
Thank you. And I guess my question would be, is it important in this NDO? Is it important to our community, and is it important that that be there as it relates to that? That's just a question I'm putting out to everybody. Is it important? Is it something that we believe should be in writing or should be stated?
I remember this being addressed at the KLC meeting, and if I'm not mistaken, and I'm paraphrasing, you did mention that also if an attorney was to file a frivolous lawsuit, that there's some repercussions from perhaps the Bar Association. So there's a lot of avenues, but I would agree that typically they're not included in every law. So I don't know that it would be appropriate for us to put it in ours. I think it goes maybe without say.
One piece of this, a small piece of this, is that the complaint form itself will require a written signature and the plaintiff, the complainant, to swear to it. That won't have a warning or a statement about it, but there will be a form to file that someone will need to swear to when they make a complaint, which is typical.
I think I'm okay without adding something specific. I do hear what you're saying, Pastor Pam, about that this was enough of an issue for the public that if it was included in there, it could at least allay some fears. But I guess at this point, I would just open this up to the board and see if anyone else would like to make sure it's included, or if we think it's okay as written.
I think with the legal advice that we just received, we found that there is something else attached to the NDO as it relates to someone signing a sworn statement as to these are the facts, this is the truth. So I think that kind of squashes what I just asked.
Okay. And I think, if I recall correctly, I'm trying to find it. Of course, things aren't in the same order, but I believe that there was something to that effect in Ms. Magana's answer to this.
There was
question 14.
Question 14, thank you.
It was there, but everyone online and
oh, yes, I agree
cannot.
Completely. Yes, making sure that it's very clear. And this is also another place where I think it would be appropriate to bring in some of the language from Ms. Magana's answers also, if everyone's okay with that. Okay, so the next item is cost prohibition. And that is, the board heard comments from the public that expressed concern over the shared expense of mediation, that there may be some individuals who do not have the financial wherewithal to pay those costs. And so I'm kind of adding on to what you wrote here, Shala, but is that where you were going with that? Yes, I did. I read the issue. Yes. I just added a little bit to it. I'm sorry.
I apologize. It'll be in the analysis, I guess.
Okay.
But that would be fair to say. I think what you just said would be fair
Okay.
to say.
All right, so if there's no other comments, then I'll skip to the analysis, not skip to, go to the analysis. So having a process where discrimination issues can be resolved without significant legal expense or prolonged litigation is beneficial, because attorneys generally only accept cases on contingency which they feel have a high probability of winning and a potential for damages significant enough to compensate their time investment. Upfront legal costs prohibit some individuals from pursuing discrimination complaints. This system has the potential to be less expensive and more accessible than traditional litigation because it utilizes mediation, which is typically less expensive than litigation. Similar municipalities have established waiver programs or sliding scale fees for those unable to pay mediation fees. One example has been to utilize penalties collected from violations of the ordinance to fund these fee programs, which has already been stated. So is there any further discussion on this subject of the cost prohibition before we get to the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, I'll get to the recommendation. It says to uphold the NDO as written and institute a waiver program or sliding scale fee system for those unable to pay for mediation fees. I think that actually might contradict itself if we're saying do it as written, but add to it. So we're not saying do it as written. This would be recommending that we change it.
We had also gotten a great suggestion from the public about looking at recommending that we chat with Kansas Legal Services about mediation fees, sliding scale fees. Like, we might want to specifically say that as our recommendation, or put it in areas for follow-up or additional considerations. I'm not sure, but they do that for other organizations. So it is something that the city manager's office could look into. So I don't know if it goes in the recommendation there or under additional considerations.
Well, to me, if we are saying just uphold the NDO as written, then that's a period, and we're not saying we would like something added to it. So if we're recommending that a program be implemented, a waiver program or a sliding scale, then that wouldn't be upholding it as written. Does that make sense?
Okay, then maybe don't uphold it as written, add the amendment, if we're all in agreement to the amendment with the legal services and so forth.
So the recommendation would be to include the amendment or to insert the information.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So
To institute a waiver program and also with Kelly's other information too.
The sliding scale.
Yeah.
okay, so I think at this point we don't necessarily have to go person by person if we just do a roll call of yeas and nays. Does that make more sense? Instead of going person to person. So if I'm understanding before we do a formal motion, the motion would be to recommend some additional language to the ordinance that would institute a waiver program or a sliding scale fee system for those who are unable to pay for mediation fees, and that the city look into other services which may provide reduced legal fees. Instead of naming a specific service, does that sound good? All right, so I will make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay.
All right, all in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Now we are on to bathroom concerns. So this one I think doesn't need explanation, but I will go ahead and read it. The board heard comments from the public that expressed concern over transgender members of the community dressing in correspondence with their gender identity utilizing restrooms that are consistent with their gender identity. I think I read that wrong, maybe? Utilizing, okay. That makes it sound better, thank you. Okay, so again, this is a statement of fact. We definitely heard that concern. So unless anybody would like to say anything about that statement, then I'll go directly to the analysis. The analysis was that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission released guidance on June 15th, 2021 that specifies employers must not prohibit transgender employees from dressing in accordance with their identity or using bathrooms, locker rooms, or showers that are consistent with their gender identity. Additionally, the DICRAB asked for further clarification from the city's law department on the impact of the NDO on the city's current ordinance regulating restrooms, public restrooms, which is code sections 5.70.010 and 5.70.020. The following information was provided to the DICRAB on September 14th, 2021 by Jennifer Magana, City Attorney and Director of Law. Quote, in the proposed non-discrimination ordinance, or the NDO, public accommodations, which would likely include access to the business restrooms, public restrooms, must not discriminate based on any of the protected classes listed, among them being gender identity. Gender identity is defined in the NDO as an individual's actual or perceived by the individual or another gender-related identity, expression, appearance, or mannerisms, or other gender-related characteristics, regardless of the individual's designated sex at birth, end quote. This definition is consistent with the expanded interpretation of protections provided under the U.S. Supreme Court case of Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, which was decided in 2020, which interpreted Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 concerning discrimination based on sex in the employment arena. The current ordinance would not necessarily have to be repealed because of, nor would it be automatically invalidated by adoption of the proposed NDO. It could continue to be enforced as it currently is on a complaint-only basis, end quote. So is there any discussion on that, Mr. Polite? I think this is where your question came in. And if I am reading this correctly, and Ms. Magana, if I am not, please jump in and correct me. But it is the information that Ms. Magana provided to us is that this, the protections for using a restroom that is not your gender of birth has already been decided by the United States Supreme Court, and that protection has already been extended out to those individuals at a federal level, which then means the NDO would not be out of compliance with that, I guess would be the right word. Does that answer your question, Mr. Polite?
Maybe. So just in general layman's terms, so at this current time, based on what we're reading here, and based on the U.S. Supreme Court case of Bostock versus Clayton, an individual can now, based on their perception, I can walk into any restroom I choose.
I'm going to leave that one for Ms. Magana.
That's where I struggle. The only place I struggle in the whole NDO conversation.
Well, you're not the only one. It is getting into an area that is just a little bit unclear. Just to clarify, the Bostock case decided by the U.S. Supreme Court was an employment-only case.
Okay, employment-only.
And I think the memo does say that, but there's a lot in the memo. So what is relevant about that is that the Kansas Human Rights Commission adopted the broad definition of protection based on sex from the Bostock language. So for applying it to all the Kansas anti-discrimination laws, which include public accommodation. So there's that.
Okay. Okay, so the Supreme Court case, just to make sure I understand it, have my mind right around it, is only pertains to employment.
It was an interpretation under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which was an employment law.
But the Kansas
Human Rights Commission?
Yes. It took a broader interpretation and extended that protection out in their interpretation to include public accommodations and housing as well?
That's what their statement of policy currently says.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bostock was extended to schools, as well. The Office of the Civil Rights of U.S. Department of Education has applied Bostock to Title IX in terms of school restrooms.
So just, I guess in answer to that question, it sounds like that has already been decided by others for us. Does that make sense, Mr. Polite?
Well, and I think there's
I think what I'm hearing is that currently then that you can walk into any restroom of your choice based on your perception. I'm just asking, and it might sound like a dumbed down version of the conversation, but I need that dumbed down version to, it is, am I hearing totally correctly? I think I am, but I just talking to the board that I could tomorrow say I perceive myself a certain way and I can walk into the women's restroom.
Okay. You're talking about in a school setting? No,
any setting, public accommodations.
Okay, that's how you perceive
yourself.
Well,
except there are exemptions for religious organizations from that at federal, right, state, and the NDO.
So at the city building today, I could walk into the girls' restroom.
If you
based on my perception.
Wait, looking like you look right now?
I'm just not able to take that position at this time.
I think
I'm just not able to clarify any further.
I understand.
Looking like
way, based on this, you have to be dressed a certain way to go into the women's restroom.
Well, if you perceive yourself to be a woman, aren't you going to be dressed like a woman?
I don't know. I'm asking.
If you perceive yourself to be a she, aren't you going to be, if you're going to she restroom, you perceive yourself as she, why are you dressing like a he? Because now the perception, how you're presenting it, now you're presenting yourself as he. But if you're dressed up like a she, your perception of you is she. Everybody else, all of us walking by, we see you as she. So why wouldn't you go in the she restroom?
Go ahead.
So if I wear pants on and a shirt, which men and women both wear, so all women don't wear dresses. True.
I think we're getting a little bit.
Yeah, and we determined that we are. I mean, last meeting I asked specifically if we had laws on the books to handle any issues that would happen in the bathrooms, and we do. And we also, in terms of actual and perceived, nobody has checked my parts when I've gone into the bathroom. And I'm guessing nobody else's parts have been checked when they go into any bathroom. So I think we're kind of getting into some areas that aren't proposed as real problems at this point. We're kind of conjecturing. But I do think that we have laws on the books that deal with any kind of lewd behavior, if that's the implication that's being made.
No,
but the law.
I'm not even talking about lewd behavior at this point. I'm simply asking, can I walk into a women's bathroom based on my perception of myself?
If you were perceiving yourself as a woman, I would assume that the answer would be yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Yes, Pastor Pam.
Are there not, or help me with clarification on this or clarity on this, are there things possibly that tonight we may not get to what our recommendation actually is, that it may be a recommendation that we ask that it come back to us for us to talk about or consider? I'm listening and I'm hearing, and I do believe that this area specifically requires more discussion, and everyone is not present today, but also it may be something that we say we'd like it to come back to the board. It doesn't have anything to do with the overall NDO moving forward, but that this area doesn't mean that we have to approve every specific thing in order for it to move forward.
I think I would like to hear from any other board members who want to weigh in on that.
Sorry. As far as providing a recommendation, we don't all have to be in agreement on every section. Somebody can put an opinion within any part of this, like the bathroom area, that would disagree with the rest of us, and we can add your opinion in as well.
Not understanding what I'm saying. I'm saying that with our recommendation to the city council on the NDO by the non-binding vote going forward, can we not then incorporate some other things that give some timeframes or some more work in the process as it relates to it coming back to the board or to a board? Can we not include that, and just instead of just kind of saying what I hear is, okay, this is it, and that's all. So I think that we need to look past just October 12th. Are there some other things we want to incorporate or recommend as it relates to reviewing, as it relates to other dates and times? And I know you're there already, Shayla.
Yes, absolutely. When we get to the bottom, there's an area for follow-up or additional considerations where we can specifically ask to do those types of things in the future. We can bring it back to us. I don't know that we'll ever kind of get this issue settled with regard to the bathroom confusion, but yes, there is, to answer your question, I believe what your question is, there is a place when we get to the end of this for us to put in something like that where we ask to revisit things or have additional input.
So,
Okay.
I guess I'm seeking further clarification to make sure I understand. So if you had areas specifically that you wanted to ask for maybe more robust discussions on, would the action then be, or your perception of how that would move forward would be that the board passes the NDO with the exception of that one section? Or, you know, because we heard about the bathroom concerns. I don't know that that's a separate section in the NDO. That would just be a ramification of the NDO, I think.
It is a part of it as it relates
Yes.
to public accommodations.
Public accommodations, yes.
But when I read the NDO, does it say restrooms?
This is where I wish I had my laptop so I could just search the word.
Just to maybe answer a few questions, if we can bring Jennifer up to discuss the memorandum she sent to us on September 14th. I think there was some specific, there is a specific law that covers this already.
Oh, and I do know that, but I do think that it appears that we are being, in some ways, as rushed as everything else has been rushed. And that's just my concern, is that we make sure that we take the time to say if there's something that we really don't have clarity on or, consensus on as a board, that we step back and look at that or ask that we can look at it. That may not be a part of the process, but I'm just asking that question.
I think that would be fair, and there would be a mechanism to do that within this report where you would state exactly that.
Pastor Hughes came in, we maybe like the things that we are not in consensus with. You think you just want to just table those things till October the 5th? It's due October the 12th. You think you want to table a few things that we haven't made a firm decision on as a board and in agreement on? You want to table those things to the 5th?
I would like to, as much as possible, resolve as many things as we absolutely can as a board this evening. I would shy away from tabling things. They have asked for our input, and if our input is we think this area needs to be looked at more closely, then that absolutely can be our input. Does that make sense? But I would like to see us move forward, and obviously that's the will, that needs to be the will of the board, but it would be my recommendation that we pursue a complete recommendation as much as we can this evening, even if there's sections where we say we believe this needs to be further reviewed before a vote is made by the city council.
Okay. Tabitha, right now, how many do you have that we're undecided on at the current time?
The restrooms, I believe we're getting pretty, I think the restrooms are the only thing we've covered so far. We do have just a couple more things to discuss, so we're not far off from getting through the actual document. Somebody asked Ms. Magana to come up, and I'm sorry, you're just standing there.
Sorry.
I wanted to give Shala the chance to ask the question that you wanted to ask of Ms. Magana. You may need to restate it.
Right now, the table.
I think you might need to restate the question, or do you remember the question, Ms. Magana?
Oh, could you restate it? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I just asked you if you would discuss a little bit the memorandum that has to do with the actual law that covers bathrooms.
You know, and another comment I might make is that currently, if the Kansas Human Rights Commission has adopted this policy as enforcement, it may be a resource to consult on how it would apply the law at the state level. You know, the ordinance just reflects that in the city of Wichita, there is currently a public restroom ordinance. And that was the question, how would it be applied to? Like any ordinance, that ordinance is enforced on a complaint-only basis. And we frankly just do not see at the prosecution level very much activity in that area. Have not seen cases in municipal court for some time. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was kind of the look we took at that. So it has not been used recently to my knowledge.
I have a question for you, Ms. Magana. I looked through the NDO and I don't see any reference to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Am I missing it somewhere in there?
It is not specifically referenced, no. It does say that in the ordinance, I think Section 5, that the ordinance will, of course, not violate or be in contradiction with any law. It does name off specifically the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, some Kansas laws, but it doesn't state Title VII.
Or the entirety of the Civil Rights Act at all?
That's correct. Correct.
Okay.
It does not.
Thank you.
But I mean, a lot of it mirrors that, but does not state it. You're correct.
Okay, so I think before we move on from the restroom question, I think now would be an appropriate time to see if it is the will of the board that we recommend upholding the NDO as written, or we want to take a different approach on this subject since there was so much discussion on it. So does anyone have any motions they would like to make on the subject?
I so move that we move forward with the NDO as it relates to taking it back to the City Council with the necessary recommendations that we have talked about today.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was specifically talking about the subject of restrooms. If we wanted to...
There's a motion on the floor.
Yes, there is a motion on the floor. Is there
Call
a second?
for order.
I'm sorry, is there a second for the motion?
I can second.
Okay. Okay, so to clarify, to make sure I understand, your motion is to make our actual vote on whether or not we are going to recommend the NDO with anything that we have discussed already?
Correct, with the recommendations.
Okay, so, and just before we take the vote, I'm fine with taking the vote. Clearly, we have a second of the recommendation. We have not, we still have like 2 things we still need to discuss that were on the list. If people are okay with not discussing those and moving on, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure that was on record before we take a vote. So
I can withdraw my motion at this time pending us discussing the extended time frames as I'm looking down.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. I was just not quite through the agenda yet.
Well, when you call for it, it's like, okay.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I rescind my motion at this time.
Yeah, so when I called for a motion, that was specifically on the subject of the restrooms, whether we wanted to make a recommendation to just pass the ordinance as written onto, or make that recommendation to the city council, or if we wanted to make a different recommendation that further discussion occur around the restroom concerns, or that was what I was trying to make the motion on. I apologize, or seek motions on. Okay, that's what you thought you were seconding.
I'm way
okay.
down here.
All right. Okay. All right. So does anyone want to make a motion on the restroom issue, since that was something we did have so much discussion about? So if there is no motion, then I apologize. What are you saying, Shala? I'm sorry. Oh, to pass the recommendation as written. Is there a motion to pass the recommendation to be as the NDO upheld as written? Wow, I got to that rather
section.
Yes. This section, yes.
I would make that motion.
Okay.
I'd second it.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Okay.
Withholding.
Just
Withholding?
note,
Okay.
just note, we have one
Oh, we do.
person who
We do.
is not
Okay.
returned yet.
So how about we go ahead and I will bring that back for her to well, I guess at this point she would be an abstain because she's not in here. So so we would have 2 abstains then. Okay, so the last area of discussion, is that not how it works?
If she's not here, she's not here. She can't abstain. She
That's
just didn't
true.
vote.
She would just be not
She's
present.
on her way back, though.
Okay, we'll hold it. So we're currently voting on whether or not to recommend that we uphold the NDO as written in this section about bathrooms. So, just looking for your vote.
I would vote to uphold as it was written in this section about bathrooms.
Okay.
Sorry
All right.
about that.
Thank you. All right, so our last area of conversation that I have written down, I believe, and we can bring anything else up that was on the points if anybody else wants to, but in this report we had discussed the potential of extending the time frame from 60 to 180 days potentially, and that was based honestly off of discussions that I heard from members at KLC, where there was discussion of sometimes it takes a while to get your nerve up to bring something forward and to decide that you want to do it, and allowing 180 days versus 60 days to file that complaint, I don't think should extend the amount of time that they have past the point of filing the complaint for the city to take action and do the mediation and investigation. But I just wanted to bring that topic up for conversation and see how everyone else feels about it.
I think the 180-day time frame is more consistent with other agencies that take complaints like this. It makes sense to me. I hadn't considered the emotional factor of things, but added to keeping in line with other agencies and the emotional factor, I think it's a good recommendation.
I agree.
Okay. Is it, do we have a motion? I guess I can make the motion.
You're facilitating, right?
Okay, yeah, I'll let someone else make the motion. I should have done my read up. I was kind of relying on having that parliamentarian. So you're
so
acting
moved
as my
that we our recommendation is to extend the filing time frame from 60 days to 180 days in consistency with other agencies and non-discrimination ordinances.
I'll second.
I'll third that.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay. All right. Motion carries, yes. I believe if everybody has had an opportunity to look at the issues that were raised by board members, is there anything else that anyone wants to discuss? I think most of that has been covered already.
There's one thing that I thought of that I didn't bring up that I'd like to propose. I would like to consider maybe adding protections for citizenship in the public accommodation and housing sections. They only have protection for employment on a federal level, and they don't have any protections for anything else. So I would like us as a board to consider adding protections for them, because there's no state or city level or
Under
federal.
public accommodations, to make sure I'm understanding.
Under public accommodations or housing
Okay.
at all, federal or Kansas level. So they wouldn't, there's no, protection for citizenship on any level for citizenship. So
Okay.
I would like us as a board to maybe consider making that recommendation for city council to consider that.
So you would be proposing adding it to all 3 categories? employment, housing,
so-
and public accommodations?
Yeah, so citizenship has federal level protections, so we could, as a board, consider making a recommendation to add it to the NDO as well.
employment,
Just to, just get it, it'd make it easier, but, especially in those public accommodation and housing sections, because there is no coverage at all for citizenship on federal or state level.
Okay.
So,
Would you like to make a motion?
yes, I make a motion, I guess I'm gonna make a motion to add, to recommend that citizenship be added to employment, public housing, to public accommodate, okay, let me rephrase that. I'm going to make a motion that citizenship is added to public accommodation, housing, and employment sections.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right. Motion carries. I remembered. Okay. If there is not anything else that any other members of the board would like to bring up for discussion, then I believe that that would make us ready for your motion, Pastor Pam.
I so move that we recommend back to the city council to uphold the NDO, that we say that it, we support it, but also with the necessary recommendations and suggested additions included.
And I will second that.
All right, and I will call a vote. I think we'll just do it by voice, so all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, motion carries. And I believe,
Tabitha, are you going to address the 259?
I am so sorry. I think it was slightly brought up, but let's just, yes, let's discuss the 259. I am so sorry. Could you please put your question out there that you would like us to discuss?
Yeah, I was just curious, and Mr. Polite, you might chime in on this. And Jennifer, you might as well. What this NDO might and how it might impact Wichita Public Schools.
Is there a specific area?
Yeah, not just the bathrooms, but I'm thinking about how traditionally schools have been separated, athletics and other events separated from male, female. I'm curious about how this might impact those things.
Well, the best of my knowledge, I'll say that I defer to the federal and state laws that would specifically regulate educational institutions, and I frankly have not looked at those and how that would interplay. But as written, the ordinance is applicable to with the exclusions you've seen everywhere else in the city limits. There is not an exclusion. Some ordinances in some cities, I believe, have exempted schools. I can't think of which ones, but currently this would apply, and there would have to be an interplay on how the federal and state laws that are specific to education would affect this. That's the best I can tell you at this time. I just haven't looked further into it, but I'd be happy to look into it.
Thank you. Mr. Polite.
And Pastor Gates, the only two areas that come to mind that have been brought up, to my knowledge, is restroom usage and making sure that everyone is accommodated properly. And then the issue of sports. And that's an ongoing conversation on who can participate in what sports. And I don't know that there's been any final answers there, sir.
So would the phraseology that you elevated, actual or perceived, create any problems for you or for the school district?
It could, depending on if someone is trying to take advantage of those terms. It could. It all depends on the situation, case by case, sir.
It's going to be a case by case, I think, a case by case situation. Because in a school setting, you have somebody that perceives themselves to be one way, don't the whole school know that they perceive themselves that way? The majority of the school knows he or she is that way.
And Ms. Brehan, when I say that, I'm not talking about those who truly perceive themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I support those who truly perceive themselves, even outside of their designated sex at birth. But I can see those who want to just take advantage of the law. And I'm not talking about those in the LGBT community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about those who just want to say,
right.
I want to take advantage of this
opportunity.
That's what concerns me. I totally uphold those who truly perceive themselves,
right.
be able to use.
But don't we have enough of them out there already that already play that game?
I don't know that they know that they can just walk into a restroom yet.
So you're saying actually putting this out there will open up the door for the opportunity to like, oh, now I can just walk in here.
I think it has that possibility.
Uh-huh.
And that does concern me. But it has nothing to do with the LGBT community itself. I support the LGBT community.
I just wanted to add as well that a couple of years ago, the Wichita Public Schools, the county commission passed their own NDO, so it might be good to follow up. I mean, the NDO hasn't passed, so that's important to remember, but to follow up maybe with the county commission and ask how the NDO has affected the Wichita Public School system, to maybe ask some questions and see. That might answer some of your questions, Pastor. I think since we're talking about Wichita Public Schools, it might be good to follow up with them and see how their own Wichita Public School NDO has affected the Wichita Public Schools. And I think it was maybe specifically geared towards some of the same protected classes that this NDO would affect. So yeah, it might be good to maybe reach out and see how maybe some of the questions that you have, they might have some answers. Are
you saying that there's a county NDO? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think or was it a USD 259 one, or maybe
County has not passed an NDO.
Okay.
No.
USD 259 has one.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking of. So yeah,
259 has one.
Okay, so yeah, I knew there was some kind of.
Yes, the county would not have jurisdiction over 259.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's what it was. Right. I knew there was like some kind of NDO though, so that may be good to reach out and ask some questions with them.
So I guess my question would be, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just trying to identify where that NDO was. USD 259 has one?
Yeah, that was my mistake. It was the school district has one, not county commission. So school district has one.
The USD 259 has one? Is what you're telling me. I'm just trying to clarify that.
Yes.
Yes, that's what she's saying.
Okay, when we have two gentlemen that you guys are involved with USD 259, do you guys have any information on that particular document being in that environment and that field?
I think the proper person to really get your details from could be, of course, our legal department, and then Terrell Davis, Pastor Terrell Davis, who is a major part of that work, and Mr. Keith Reynolds.
If you go online and search it, there is contact information online as well under Wichita Public Schools Statement of Non-Discrimination. There's contact folks on that website.
All right, so I think our next order of conversation, I guess, on this would be at some point we need to get this report completed and then submitted to the city council. So I think now would be an appropriate time, as we have completed the discussion, the NDO discussion, then to move on to discussing our timeline for getting our report completed, who we see completing that work, and then I personally would like to see us have a time when we approve that. I don't care if it's all via Zoom, as long as that's legally allowed. I don't think we all need to come in, but yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I know tonight we are actually facilitating this conversation.
Right.
So I guess my next part of that is, isn't part of this also, isn't LaShonda also included in this in helping us formulate this?
Yes.
And not just we ourselves?
I believe so, yes, and I think that's why I'm trying to kind of incorporate, that's why I said who would be writing the report, that sort of thing. But even with it, even if LaShonda's the person or the city's staff or the people who write the report, I still believe it is important that the board see that report and have a chance to approve that report before it is presented to the city council. So that's, I'm sorry, I wasn't very clear. That's what I was trying to get at.
So one point of clarification
Yes.
before we get to that. The vote for moving the NDO forward with the recommendations, Pastor Gay, are you a no?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's clear and on the record that it was not a unanimous vote.
Yes.
I also want to make sure that we have covered any comments that you want to make sure is included in the conversation before we get to report.
Okay.
We will work on the report in a partnership with Charlotte. I think she's already has a great start, and we should continue using that same format and not starting from ground zero.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure we get Pastor Gates' comments on
Yes.
the books, and then we can switch over to getting the report written.
Yeah, thank you. It doesn't escape me that we've had great conversations, and I've learned a lot over the course of the last 2 months while picking through this document. Whether it's flawed or it can be improved, one of the challenges that I have with and why I'm saying no to it is because I keep hearing, whether consciously or subconsciously, from the board members and others that we'll refer back to state or federal law. And if that phraseology exists and we continue to refrain back to it's covered by or it is covered by, then the question then elevates for me, why do we need this? The challenge that also I have seen in some of the documents as I elevated to Ms. Magana is that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 not included at all. In the other 7 state and federal combined laws that refer back to or the basis for this NDO, its exclusion of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 creates a bit of a problem for me. Why would you exclude that piece of legislation and not, or add others or keep others in? And anytime I think that the city or any entity begins to stretch or pull on the federal protected classes, add to, you get into a slippery slope, especially not having a full understanding of what phraseology and or beliefs might continue to open a Pandora's box on some things that you might not intend. Knowing that I don't support discrimination, I don't support people being abused or taken advantage of, I still have a concern about the fact that the document doesn't really add to, in my opinion, any of the laws that are already in existence that gives it its foundation.
Mr. Gates, I have a question.
Yeah.
Why don't you make a motion to add the 1964 Act? At least have to start there.
Yeah, I think that again goes back to the original of saying that it's built on laws that are already in existence. And so adding another one, I think, then doesn't deal with the address some of the issues I think that are core. For me, it is just a poor replication of the laws that are already in existence.
Would anybody else like to make any comments? Okay. Seeing none, and thank you, LaShonda, for doing that. I did have it written down to to make sure we captured his comments, but it was in a slightly different order, so that's fine. We've captured them. I just wanted to make sure Mr. Gates is aware that or Pastor Gates was aware that I was not trying to overlook you having your ability to make your comments in dissent. Okay, thank you. So if we want to then discuss the report, it sounds like, LaShonda, if you wouldn't mind coming up and we could kind of discuss maybe how you see this moving forward, and then we can make any recommendations that we might like to add.
So we will take what Shala has started that you've been working from tonight. We will update it with the changes that you have requested. In the top of the language, we will add the vote that you would like for the NDO to be passed, and the vote is 9-1. So we will note that in the document, and we will get all of the updates made this week and send it back out to the advisory board for final approval of language. And then the other option that is on the table that was discussed last week is the board actually presenting your recommendation to the mayor and city council directly. Dante has confirmed that that is an option for the board to be present at the October 12th meeting, and if you desire to present your recommendation, that you are able to do so.
So just to make sure I'm clear, you said you would get that report to the board by the end of this week, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and at that time then, do we need to have a meeting, or can we just submit our input to you? I don't want to make this more complicated than it needs to be, but I want to make sure we're not going sideways of any open meetings act rules.
So any information that you submit to me via email, as we've done with other items, have to come to me and me only. Mm-hmm. And as long as we do not have conversations through the email chain, we are not in violation of any of the COMA regulations or Open Meetings Act.
So can we approve? I guess my question is, can we approve the report without having to have another meeting? Or is it simply that if we can, I guess, leave it as we approve unless we feel like there needs to be a meeting, I suppose? I mean, what is your recommendation on that?
Well, there won't be major edits to the document. Most of what has been discussed tonight is taking the writings that Shala has already produced. Okay. So we will be adding language in regards to the vote, and then where there were two items, I believe, where you were making changes to not upholding the written document, but actually changing language. Mm-hmm. We're still going to use Shala's language and just remove the first part of that statement. Okay. So I don't think that there is going to be much changes to the document that you've already seen, that it would require us to have a vote, because you've made your vote and decision already. Okay. This is really language that we're working through.
Is everyone on the board comfortable with that? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. And will that document then capture Pastor Gates's dissent somewhere in the document?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so then I guess the next topic we need to discuss then that you brought up was whether the board would like to present this as a whole, or how we want to do that, and whether we want to do that on October 12th. I think there was also some discussion, and I forgive me if I don't remember which meeting it was brought up, but also there was some discussion about potentially presenting that on October 5th, so there was more time for the city council to read through the report and digest that. So I guess the conversation now needs to be, what is the will of the board? Well, first question is it possible to present that on October 5th if that is our preference versus the 12th? And I think Dante's coming up.
Hey everybody, I'm Dante Martin, Assistant City Manager. So the plan is for the NDO to appear on the October 12th council agenda. At this point, council doesn't plan to have this item on the agenda multiple times. If your point, or the larger issue, is getting the information, the recommendation in the hands of council so that it can consume and digest the information can be provided in advance of the October 12th meeting. Okay. So as soon as there's a report that's finalized, and ready to be presented, we can share that recommendation, that report with council, with the understanding the board will appear at the October 12th meeting and make a formal recommendation, a presentation before council.
Yeah, I made that motion to get the October 5th meeting, but my intent was so that they had the information ahead of time. And if you're saying they will have it ahead of time, then we don't need to be at that meeting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so is there is there discussion on the board as to how we would like this report presented? Would we like it presented in a formal fashion?
I would like to just get them the report as soon as possible for review, and then we can attend the October 12th meeting.
Okay.
So as soon as we're done doing what we need to do, it can go over to them if that's doable.
Yep, I will, as long as you guys respond okay. After I get you the report, once you give the final blessing, we will then get it over to the mayor and council for them to digest. If you do want to be on the agenda for our October 12th, I think it's important that you make that decision tonight so that we can plan for that accordingly, so that you are a part of the agenda when they bring the item forward.
Do you need a motion for that?
Sure.
Yeah, I believe so, but I think we first need to decide, I mean, does the whole board want to en masse get up and present this? I mean, how are we going to do this? I think there's some logistics that we probably should talk about.
I'm so sorry. I think we should first determine that we're going as a board.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then secondly, look at what the presentation is going to look like in representing the board.
I agree with that.
Okay, sounds good to me.
So is there a motion on the floor for the board to present at the October 12th meeting?
I will make that motion that the Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights Advisory Board make a presentation at the Wichita City Council meeting on October 12th.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, so now we can get into the discussion as to how that presentation will look. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I guess I would say, as I'm looking, is there someone who's on the board, online, or in the room that would like to make that presentation? I think it's important that we're there, but that there be a spokesperson or persons, depending on what that looks like, because that can be kind of extensive in reading. So maybe that means two persons and not just one. And maybe that means stretching past just us sitting here and somebody volunteering.
I'm happy to help in any way to do. I like doing presentations, so I'd be happy to help with that. But if somebody else loves doing them, let's go for it.
I nominate Tabitha. And
Tabitha.
I was great with Kelly. I can be support. Well, and I guess part of this conversation, since I guess you did nominate. Do we have to take action?
Yeah, we can do nomination.
If I can just back up, do you have any feedback for us as to how this might look when we go to present, the things that we need to make sure we do?
So there are a number of options you can, go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt, please. So the board recommendation will be part of a larger presentation to the mayor and council. And so as is typical, staff will initiate the presentation. We'll prepare a slide deck, and the board is more than welcome to be engaged or be involved in developing that slide deck that will be presented. What I anticipate will be a transition. Initially, it'll be either Jennifer or myself that'll make a presentation related to the NDO. And then we will introduce whoever the board elects to make the presentation. And then we'll ask you to come up and formally present your recommendation. And included in the slide deck that we develop for mayor and council can be an overview or slides related to your recommendation so that you don't have to entirely read from the document. You can read from the slides that are summarizing the presentation. So it'll be a tag team approach between staff and whoever the board designates.
Would it also be appropriate to then allow Pastor Gates, if you would like, to then make a statement yourself as the person who dissented from the vote, I just feel like we should open that up to you if you would like, especially because you had questions about that to begin with. But so I'm all fine with us finding somebody to represent the board if that's the will of the board, but I also wanted to make sure you have the opportunity to be present and say what you would like to say as well.
I appreciate that, and I was going to ask that because I was the only dissenting voice that I would have space. I don't know exactly how much time it would be, but just to express my concerns or my viewpoint and why I said no to, and then, so if I had to go first, that's fine, it doesn't matter. I just want to make sure.
You would have that opportunity, Pastor Gates.
All right, so I guess at this point, I guess we should see if anyone would either volunteer, or I'm all about people volunteering rather than being nominated, but whatever's proper procedure. I think Kelly volunteered.
She volunteered.
I believe so.
It's honestly, if somebody else wants to do it, I'm totally fine. It doesn't matter to me.
I don't see anybody jumping for it. Is there anybody else who would like to volunteer?
I can assist Kelly since
I did all the work.
Yeah, I think so. And I will definitely be there for moral support, but I am more than happy to hand this off to someone else. So how about we have a motion that Kelly and Shala present with Pastor Gates? I'm just looking for someone to make a motion. I'm not making
I so move that Kelly and Shala present the recommendation from the board, and included in that is the part for Pastor. That's Gates. That's my motion.
We have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Aye. All right, motion carries.
Awesome. So just so that we all are on the same page, we will make the updates to the report. We will get it to the board by Friday. We will work directly with Kelly, Shala, and Pastor Gates on the slide deck to make sure that you see them before we get to presentation time, so that you have an opportunity to review them and make any edits you think are necessary. But it is really going to be a summary of the recommendation that the board has provided. So we will be pulling from the document that you see and approve or give final blessing. We will send out the document by the end of the week, so by Friday. So if we can get everybody to respond to me by Tuesday the 28th, that gives us a weekend and a couple days to review it and give final blessing so that we can get it over to the mayor and council for them to digest before the meeting on October 12th. Fair game? I'm sorry, Mr. Polite.
Just for clarity's sake, I think I asked this at one of the previous meetings. So our recommendation that we're going to make to approve the NDO based on what we've discussed tonight, does this council have to accept our recommendation, or is this just a recommendation?
It is.
How much weight does it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are we really making the decision on this, or we're just discussing this?
It is a recommendation to the mayor and city council. So the mayor and city council will make the final decision on how to move forward with the NDO.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions related to the actual recommendation, the time frame for when we want to get items completed, and the presentation on October the 12th? Any final comments around the NDO before we discuss next month and close out for the evening?
I have one question for you, LaShonda.
Yes.
And this is just in regards to this Kansas Leadership Center. Am I reading this wrong, or does this say this was drafted September 20th of 2022?
So it's a typo.
I'm sorry. Oh. Hold on, I got a pup going nuts.
That's okay.
Is this their final version that the Kansas Leadership Center, have they put this out in the public as of yet?
No. So this is a draft document, and they are still making their final edits in relationship to typos or those types of things. And they also wanted to make sure there were no updates that they needed to make based off of the feedback from the advisory board on tonight. So the final document has not been presented to the city of Wichita. This was draft form to ensure that you had something to respond to this evening.
Now, before they release their report, can we get this report before it hits the street and before council? This is their final draft right here from the meeting that we had with them. Oh, yeah, I got a little dog going crazy. I'm so sorry.
Good evening, Jennifer. Once KLC makes the report available to staff in its final form, it's a public document. So we can share it with the board as soon as we get it, but understand that the public has full access and will have full access as well as the council. So when that document's finalized, it will be provided to the board, to the council, and to the public.
Dante, I'm very sorry. I had a little pooch that was losing his mind to get out, so I stepped up to let him out. So I missed that. I am so sorry. Could you repeat that one more time?
Certainly. So once KLC finishes the document and provides it to staff, the document will be made available to the board, to the public, as well as the council. It will be a public document made readily available to the public.
All of this going to be issued to them first. It's not coming to us as a board first?
It will not come to the board first. Once it's a final document, it will be submitted to the city manager, the mayor, council, to the board, and the public. KLC provided a draft of the document, and I don't expect substantive changes to the document. As LaShonda mentioned, I expect typos. Thank you for catching that it's not 2022 yet. So I expect those sorts of changes. I don't anticipate anything substantive. As I looked at Dennis, and he just nodded, agreeing with me. So once that document is provided, it will be given to the board, made public, as well as the mayor and council.
Okay. Question to the board.
My question is, what was our purpose in being there?
Thank you, Pastor Pam. And I don't want to speak for KLC, and so I will, Dennis, I'll ask you to come up and provide additional clarity. One of the things we wanted to accomplish is to improve the level of understanding as related not only to the NDO, but where we are in regard to local, state, and federal laws. And I think that's what occurred that first evening. There was a presentation by attorneys from Folskin that walked those in attendance through the state of the law as it is today. And then I think, and Dennis, this is where I really could use your help, I think the second evening was an opportunity for the board to hear firsthand from parties, stakeholders that are affected by the potential NDO and be engaged in that conversation. Dennis, anything that you want to provide to clarify? I would appreciate it.
Good evening. Thank you for the questions. Good to be with you all. Again, I want to make sure I understand. Are you talking about the macro purpose of why the board was included in the process in the first place, or specifically those 2 nights?
Both.
Okay, sure. So when we originally had conversations with the city, it was indicated that, you know, the mayor had suggested, as did many members of the council, making an intentional point to include this board sort of per your charter, which then led us to contact the PPMC and LaShonda to understand what might be the ways in which we do that in as genuine and authentic fashion as possible. And that, if you recall, when I attended your meeting, goodness, a month ago maybe, we had some preliminary options of what that might look like. One of you was like, you could opt in fully, or you could elect to just participate as individuals. You could have nothing to do with it at all. And so really at the heart of it was inclusion, right? We knew that this board is an incredibly important stakeholder for this process, and we just wanted you to have the options to be privy, knowing that we were gonna work with the city in some capacity to conduct some form of engagement, workshop, what have you. And so that was the why you ended up really voting to participate as a body and attend on those 2 evenings.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, you may.
How many diverse people are in your group?
Diverse people in In our group?
In the Kansas Leadership Center.
As in terms of staff and employees at our center?
Yeah, because at the meeting, when you guys facilitated, I didn't see any diversity is why I'm asking.
Oh, you're talking about, so the diversity present the evening of the engagement, is that what you're specifically referring to?
The second night of the meeting, the first night was held by the attorneys. The second night was held by your group, Kansas Leadership Center. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we hosted both evenings. That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Right. I didn't see any diversity within the group that was facilitating the meeting. So my question to you is, in terms of diversity, how many diverse individuals are in your Kansas Leadership Center, your group?
Yeah, so we're an organization of about 30 people. That evening was facilitated by a handful, probably 5 or 6 individuals. I'd probably have to ask you more specifically, like what dimensions of diversity you're specifically referring to. If you're just purely talking about optical or maybe other dimensions, I think facilitators that evening were 2 males, 2 females, 1 individual of color, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head. But if you want me to go back and collect some data on our facilitator demographics.
No, I was just thinking of that night when you guys held the meeting. I didn't see the one minority that you had in there of color, and that was just a question I wanted to ask. How diverse was your group when coming to talk to a group that is having a conversation and compiling information regarding an NDO? That's why I asked the question. You say 1.
Yeah, if you're talking about racial diversity, if that's the question specifically, yeah, one of our facilitators that evening was a person of color, Jonathan McRoy.
Okay, 1 person of color. Nobody from the LGBT community. Do you have any veterans in your group or disabled people in your group?
From those facilitating, so Jonathan McRoy is a veteran. I wouldn't be able to speak to, I'm not quite sure, LGBTQ status.
Okay, I just wondered, that was always a question that was in the back of my mind when you guys were compiling this information. Were you were a diverse group of people talking to a diversity inclusion civil rights group of people. I just didn't see that diversity. That's why I posed the question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the place where it's coming from.
I did have another question. There were quite a few persons listed on the initial list as it relates to the stakeholders. And on those 2 evenings, a lot of those stakeholders' voices weren't there. And I just wanted to know, were there a lot of persons, when we talk about 40, there weren't 40 there as it relates to that list. Did you not receive a lot of engagement or persons responding to be there as it relates to the groups that were identified?
Oh, people that sort of just elected not to come?
Or that like didn't participate?
Did not RSVP to the invitation?
Yes.
Is that what you mean? Yeah, we did have a handful of those that elected. Now, granted, there were some parameters, right? It was somewhat of a short fuse, a short turn in terms of pulling it off. The room capacity for COVID constraints was 40-ish, I think 50 tops, so that did inform the quantity of people we could have in the room. But if I recall, and I could go back for specifics, but there were a handful of groups that declined or could not attend for a variety of reasons.
Does anybody else have any questions for Dennis before we let him step down?
No, I said, so my understanding, I'm sorry, we will receive this report, the final draft, we will receive it the same time the public sees it and city council sees it. Is that what you're telling me? This report from the Kansas Leadership Center?
Mr. Martin is giving a thumbs up that is accurate, yes.
Yeah, I don't think that's fair, but that's my opinion. the information was compiled from us. We should have been able to look at it first before it's released, because now people are going to look at it as the Kansas leadership is the one that's really making making the bigger statement for council. They're the ones, based off of what they've compiled, people are going to look at it as the Kansas leadership is the one that's really leading the advice. That's just my opinion.
I think there might be a little bit of a misunderstanding that we are still, the board has still voted to create our own report. And we will see that final document and vote and let LaShonda know if we are okay with that prior to that going to the city council. I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Cleary, I don't believe that the report from KLC will actually have any recommendations in it. It is just simply compiling data. Am I correct?
That is accurate.
Okay. Yes, yeah, we already have the draft, so as LaShonda said, that report may have some typo corrections, like saying 21 instead of 22, but substantively, if I'm understanding, they did not expect a substantial change in that. So that report is just simply them, the report we've already seen is basically what we're talking about here, and the board itself is creating a separate document with the help of city staff. Did you get? Yes, she got it because she corrected a typo in it. Yes. Yeah. All right. So is there any other discussion from the board? Seeing none, are we ready to adjourn, or is there some more things you need to discuss about? All right.
So as we prepare to reset, after we've gotten through the last couple of months, we do want to take the month of October to kind of go back to the beginning and look at some of the things that we have put on the back burner to address the NDO. So in October, we will be looking at, and I hope that you will think about lessons learned from this process, so that as we begin to set expectations and foundations, we can consider those things. As well as we'll be looking at the bylaws. There will need to be some conversation around revisions to the ordinance that we will need to make, as well as we will be talking about what the plan was when we initially came together and taking the work of the committee and moving that work forward. So that is kind of what the agenda looks like for October, unless there is a board member who would like to see something else being addressed next month.
Is there would that, in the section of moving the work of the board forward, would that also include going ahead with elections on chair and vice chair? We can talk about elections in the month of October, or we can go ahead with elections. We have already received resumes. We have received resumes for each of the positions. So if you are comfortable, we can bring forth the ballot and have a vote in the month of October. One of the conversations or questions that has come up is the opportunity for the board to have some team building activity and exercises so that you can get to know one another before making that decision. So that is wholeheartedly up to the board in how you want to move forward, in whether you want to have an election in October or postpone the election and wait until November, and then we can talk about some of the foundational things we need to get addressed to continue to move this work forward, and planning for the strategic work that needs to happen, looking back at the committee work that was done over the summer.
Okay. I think it's essential that we do some team building exercises and spend some time before we move toward electing persons. Some of us have gotten to know each other in different ways during the training, but I think it's very important as we look at that. And I'd like to also add it is also 3 positions, correct? Because we voted on that, which is chairperson, co-chair, and parliamentarian.
Yes. So we will also have some training that we'll bring forward in regards to the roles and responsibilities of boards to make sure that we all understand the working relationship between boards and the city. We can talk about how the board wants to engage when issues come up, so that we are all aware of what the process needs to look like. So there's some really foundational things that I think as a board that we need to structurally put in place because the board is so new, and to ensure that we know how to move work forward when items come before the board, as well as making sure everyone is on the same page in regards to how things should operate. So there's an opportunity over the next couple of months for us to do some of that foundational building, and we will plan agendas for October and November accordingly based off of the things that we've seen and what we know we need to get done so that we can move forward effectively.
Can you give me the October date? You have, it's okay if you don't know it. I can look it up, but I was like, oh, she'll have it right on.
You know I don't. October 19th. Anyone opposed to how we are going to move forward for October, November, potentially December, depending on how far we get in those sessions? All right, seeing none, is there anything else for discussion before we adjourn for the evening? We'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you next month.